Test, test. So, tschö.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If you can please be seated now, thank you. Can I please ask you to take your seats? We're going to try to start as soon as we can. Thank you very much. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session. My name is Charles Powell, and I'm the director of the Real Instituto Elcano in Madrid, Spain. And it's a great honor for me to be moderating this session, which is held in partnership with my institute. This is my first time at the Bled Strategic Forum, and I'm extremely thankful to the hosts, to the organizers, for having asked me to moderate this session, which, as you know, will basically debate the future of Europe. The specific way the question was phrased refers to the role of the European Commission in the new European cycle that will start in October with a new Parliament and a new Commission. But I think it's a wonderful pretext to simply think about where Europe is going. So Whither Europe is, I suppose, the short title to this session. And before I hand over to our wonderful panelists, whom I will introduce in a minute, we are very fortunate to have with us the Foreign Minister of Croatia, and he is going to deliver a keynote speech on his vision of Europe's priorities. So, first of all, please, may you all welcome Mr. Gordon Grilic Radman, the Foreign Minister of Croatia. Thank you.
Dear panelists, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, so dear Slovenian friends, me veseli, da sam danes tukaj vse v redu, vsem v bledu, tak se veli. I really like to express my gratitude for invitation and to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Miro Cerar. Just 2 days ago, we met in Helsinki. We had a Gimnich informal meeting, and so it was really I had the pleasure to be for the first time at this format, this meeting, and after I was appointed as a minister in July 19, it was my actually first meeting with European colleagues. So, and it is actually the second that the Bled Strategic Forum is very, very important conference, and I'd like to thank also the Slovenian colleagues and to Minister to organize it in this very, very dynamic and turbulent time in Europe and in the world. It's my pleasure to be here with you and to share my views on the most important challenges and priorities of the EU in the new institution cycle, as well on Croatia's presidency priorities. This conference comes at the right time after the adoption of the new strategic agenda by the European Council in June, after the presentation of the ambitious political guidelines for the new European Commission by the candidate for the President of the European Commission, and at the time when the consultation on the composition of the new Commission are ongoing. You don't remember that Mrs. von der Leyen visited Croatia. It's after she visited 2 countries, and Croatia was the third one, because of Croatian assuming of the presidency. This is all happening at the moment when the EU is faced with numerous internal and external challenges: terrorism, cyber security threats, migration. Some of that we discussed also in Helsinki, like the hybrid threats and a Gulf crisis. Conflict in our neighborhood, proliferation of misinformation, rise of populism. The whole world is going through a period of uncertainty, while multilateralism is, as we know, it does not exist anymore. The situation in the EU as well as in the world is getting more and more complex. Therefore, inevitable, we, the European Union, has to act and adapt. We have to strengthen resilience to those challenges, and the best way to succeed it is by working together. Togetherness and unity are our best and most valuable strengths. We were born, or everyone for us is born, to live alone. But to live together is something to be learned. The end of October is just around the corner, and the question of Brexit is becoming more and more difficult. UK's withdrawal without a deal would be bad for both the EU and the UK. We have to face this challenge staying united as we were so far. In this complex environment, and in only 4 months' time, Croatia will assume its first presidency of the Council of the European Union. It's a big challenge for us. This role is especially dear to us, not only because it means leading the Council's work, but most importantly because it also represents the success of Croatia's European path. From a country that suffered war and aggression, we managed to recover, reform and develop to the point that we will take leadership of the European Union Council. This makes us particularly proud as it shows Croatia's ability to deal with the different challenges and numerous tasks. A significant number of the elements presented by Ursula von der Leyen in the EU's political guidelines will be high on our agenda as well. In our activities as the presidency, we will focus on those areas where we feel that the EU can deliver the most by promoting joint and inclusive initiatives beneficial to all member states, fostering a sense of unity, consensus, and convergence. We should strive to give further impetus to the proposals and initiatives contributing to uniform and sustainable economic growth, raising convergence and strengthening the competitiveness of the Union, promoting connectivity and enhancing security of its citizens. We will also continue to advocate the active role of the EU at the global scene in its neighborhood, especially our closest one, Western Balkan and Southeast Europe. There will be 4 programmatic overarching priorities we will focus on during our presidency. First of all, Europe that grows and develops, where we will promote uniform, sustainable and inclusive growth of the EU and try to address the pressing issue of demographic challenges the EU is facing. We will advocate for a strong single market, for raising the competitiveness of the EU through cohesion and convergence, whilst taking into account the sustainability of growth and tackling the ever-pressing climate change issue. Second, Europe that connects, where we'll promote initiatives contributing to transport, energy and digital connectivity, while also addressing the challenges new technologies and digitalization are posing to our societies. Third, Europe that protects its citizens by strengthening their security, both internal and external. We will work on a comprehensive approach to migration and all challenges in that regard, especially those related to the illegal migration. Fourth, Europe that is open and assertive in its immediate neighborhood and globally. On that note, we will host the major political events in Zagreb in May 2020. The Western Balkan Summit as well as the Eastern Partnership Summit. Being conscious of the transformative power of the accession process, we will continue actively supporting EU enlargement based on the fulfillment of all well-established conditions and criteria. Immediately after this panel, there will be a panel at 4 o'clock devoted specifically to enlargement, and I would like to take this opportunity to send them a message that Croatia strongly supports all the Western Balkan countries on their European path, like Slovenia does, and that as presidency, will be an honest and ambitious broker objectively evaluating their achievements and expectation with enlargement, conditionality, and reality. We discuss a second day in Helsinki with the leaders from the Western Balkan. And our statement was the same. We, in Croatia, we are and shall remain a staunch supporter of the EU enlargement policy, which has proven its transformation and reform-driven impact. In this view, the EU enlargement will have a prominent place on the agenda of our presidency of the Council. We strongly support the opening of the accession negotiation with Albania and North Macedonia in October. And we look forward to further progress in the EU accession process of Montenegro and Serbia. We welcome the fact that the Commission issued its opinion on Bosnia and Herzegovina. This is a milestone on Bosnia and Herzegovina's EU path, and it gives a clear roadmap for the country. We strongly support giving candidate status to Bosnia and Herzegovina. Our active involvement in regional cooperation is one of the key priorities in our foreign policy. Our EU membership brought us more responsibility in this direction, especially regarding the systematic technical and expert support to the Western Balkan countries in their reaching acquis and approaching the EU. For all our ambitions and plans, we need to have sound European finances. So we hope to have a high-quality agreement on the multi-annual financial frameworks as soon as possible. We are fully aware of all challenges in that process and stand ready as a future presidency to contribute to reaching a balanced deal that is acceptable to all, that reflects well EU's policy priorities and citizens' expectations. We will attribute special attention to processes related to the better functioning of the Schengen area and the Eurozone that we see crucial for the EU as a whole. We will have to deal with the consequences of Brexit. Depending on what will happen on 31st October, most probably we will be in the process of preparing a framework for future relations between the EU and the United Kingdom. Building on the results of our Finnish friends, we will undertake necessary efforts to work on all other dossiers on the Council's agenda, thus ensuring the undisturbed beginning of the new legislative cycle. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, being for the first time at the helm of the EU will be an opportunity for Croatia to jointly with our partners shape, and to quote my Prime Minister, a more agile, coherent and outward-looking European Union, fit to proactively tackle all the challenges ahead. Finally, let me conclude by saying that Croatia believes in a strong European Union, and European Union that puts its citizens at the center of its action. Their well-being, their quality of life, their safety, their future. An EU that is based on equality, on mutual respect and understanding, on constructive compromise, on ambition to prosper evenly, on high values, on freedoms, the EU that is strong for all of us. With that in mind, we will take the presidency role. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister, for those insights and for encouraging us to look ahead to the Croatian presidency of the EU. With your permission, Madam, I'm going to ask Professor Enrico Letta to speak first because he may have to leave us before this session is over. I hope nobody will object. As you all know, Professor Letta is the former Italian Prime Minister, but I think he is really proudest of the fact that he is now the Dean at Sciences Po in Paris and is doing an extremely good job in that position. So thank you very much, Enrico, for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you at the Real Instituto Elcano and, of course, at Bled Strategic Forum. I'm very pleased to be here again, and thank you for the award yesterday. It was, for me, great. In 5 minutes, we have to use Trump's method, so only tweeting is the way to say something. So I will just to produce 3 tweets, I hope less bombing than the one usually Trump is doing. So just 3 tweets on 3 topics, because of course, priorities for the future, these 5 years, there are many priorities, investments, how to reform the Stability Pact, education, I think on European universities and Erasmus. There are many, many priorities. But my choice is for 3 very different points. One is the point of the Bled Strategic Forum. I think this legislature will be successful or unsuccessful depending on the delivery on environment, on sustainability. This is the flagship of this legislature. I think we have to be, and we have to be completely aware of that. So we have to act and not to talk on this point. This is necessary. It is a necessity for all of us to be very clear in what we can do and in avoiding too high expectations with a too low delivery capacity. So I think it's a very important political exercise. But in my view, and my point of view, this is the key first point. Of course, environment and sustainability is a very large issue. So we have to be very good also in trying to focus some different aspects. But I think it's the key, is the most important point. I think it's the point where the European Union can show his leadership in the world. It is clear that we have leadership on that, but in the next 5 years, in the years in which the G2 will be established, or will try to be established, the G2, US, China, as yesterday Minister Borrell said, we have to be very good in avoiding G2 with our leadership. And leadership on sustainability, environment is the perfect way. My second tweet is on, for what I think, a similar topic, many differences, but similar in terms of global leadership for us. If I see the world today, I see a world in which competition is mostly on technology. And competition on technology means the US pushing their high-tech and saying that it's better to compete rather than to protect personal privacy. China using the same topics of competitiveness in technology, with also the aspect or the idea to have a control of society and many other, I think, important and new aspect challenges for us. I think for all of us, the key challenge is about, it's very difficult to use a brand. The only brand I like on this topic is to launch a technological humanism that European Union can lead. Technological humanism is the way for us to see that in the world, only here, only in our institutions, there's a debate, not only a debate, but also a very concrete process in trying to protect person and trying to think that my mobile is my second identity, because within my mobile, there's my second identity, and it's the first time in our lives that our second identity is out of our body and is focused in and concentrated in one chip, and if you control this chip, it is like you are in my body. So all our law or our civilization has to be evolved, because our civilization is protecting our body, our identity in our body. But our identity now is out of our body. So I think this challenge is a fantastic challenge. And we think that the protection of our identity is more important than competitiveness and profits of the high-tech companies. This is what I strongly believe. And this is, I think, our common value as Europeans. So I think there's a big challenge for all of us. It's fascinating, it's completely new, but it's the challenge of the other challenge of the next 5 years. And it is not only for the second identity that is in the mobile, but it is also for the next third identity. So the machine which will do on behalf of what I do today in 3, 4, 5, 10 years, who will control and what are the rule-setting process of this. It is completely new, and I think Europe has the natural leadership in the world, because in the rest of the world, in the US or in China, of course there are people thinking on these topics, but it's not a university experience or exercise that we need. We need parliament exercise, government exercise, authorities exercise. So something that is able to evolve the system. My third tweet, because I am at the end of my minutes, is about the topic that, of course, I know because of my previous experience in government. And yesterday in the presidential session, it was maybe the #1 topic. That was the migration issue. It is clear to all of us that next legislature will be successful if we are able to change narrative and to deliver on this topic. Last legislature was a disaster on the political issue on migrations. If we look at the consequences, political consequences, starting by Brexit and the rest, populism and so on, at the end of the day, the role of the mismanagement of migration crisis was a major role. So my point, I have to be very clear because, and I'm very frank, because I heard a lot of discussions on migration is important, is necessary, is our duty, yeah, but I want to know how. And my only take on that is that we have to be very frank. There are no solutions within the present treaties. Because within the present European treaties, there's a substantial veto right. And if there's a veto right, and if someone has the aim to use this veto right, there are no solutions. So my take on this point is that it's necessary to find solutions out of the treaties. As we did, for instance, for the financial crisis or for Schengen. Schengen and the ESM are two very important pillars today of the European constructions that we built up out of the treaties. The ESM was one treaty without the UK and Denmark, and then, the Czech Republic, that we signed and we negotiated in some weeks between 11 and 12. And now it's working. So my point is that we need a new Dublin Treaty, not named Dublin, because it's not the correct name. I would name it Bled Treaty. It could be a good idea, I think. The Bled Treaty with the willings, not all the European countries, the willings. And this Bled Treaty is the only way, I think, to have really a solidarity method and a very effective way to tackle migration issues. Without this method, it would be, for me, for what I think, and also for what is my experience, completely impossible. Because at the end of the day, there are 2, 3, 4 countries affected on the first row for the problem, because of the problem. And the other countries, they have always the idea that, okay, it's their problem, it's not our problem. But at the end of the day, it's our problem, it's a general problem. So the only way is to establish this migration policy discussion with a new treaty, with willings, maybe 20, 22, 25, maybe 26, I don't know, but is the only way to overcome problems we are having today. And please, when we discuss migrations, from now on, we have to discuss tools, concrete tools. How? Because if we discuss migration saying that we have to tackle the problem, I agree, but without tools, it's impossible to deliver. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Enrico. You've given us 3 tweets and 2 hashtags. One is technological humanism, and the other is we need a bled treaty. So thank you for that. Our next speaker is the Secretary of State for European Affairs at the Foreign Ministry in Romania, Melania Gabriela Ciot. The floor is yours. Please let me remind you of our time constraints. I'm sure you'll be very disciplined. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank to our Slovenian host for making possible this important meeting. And also, I will take this opportunity to wish a lot of success to our Croatian friend, because I know what it means to have the presidency of the Council for the first time. I was in a position of representing the Romanian presidency of the Council in the European Parliament, so it is a good exercise for a member state to prove its membership. As we all know, the European Union is a successful economic and political model based on a unique concept worldwide. But when we talk about what we expect to happen in the upcoming period, we must refer to the consolidation of the European Union, to the more cohesive functioning of this process. It is also important to remember that in the past years, our Union has to face many challenges, such as the threats of terrorism, the unprecedented pressure of illegal migration, a volatile international environment, the perspective of the UK's withdrawal from the Union, or the serious challenges posed by the climate change. It is important to mention that we will hand over the presidency of the Council to our Finnish friends with a union that is more aware of the fact that the viability, attractiveness, and the credibility of the EU project depend essentially on firm support for further enlargement to fulfill the European aspiration of the Western Balkans. Thus, we have kept on the EU agenda the accession perspective for the candidate states from the Western Balkans, an objective assumed by a series of like-minded states that held the presidency of the EU Council before us, including Bulgaria and Austria. But when we are speaking about the future of the EU, we have to have in our mind 3 important aspects, such as a real preparation at all levels in order to face these challenges. The second element is the strategic thinking that ensures the true coherence between the European agenda, the working program of the trio, and all the strategic planning instruments at EU level. And the third element is the mix of the political and tactical negotiation strategy that puts emphasis on the need to reach the necessary compromises for the benefits of all. And because I was speaking about the EU presidency of the Council that Romania held, I think that it is important for us to mention that the milestone of our presidency was the summit from Sibiu on the future of the Europe, and the declaration managed to gather everybody's support on the ways in which the EU will seek to implement its commitments, setting the basis for the adoption of the EU strategic agenda for 2019-2024. In the reflection process on the future of the European Union, the Sibiu Declaration has set the fundamentals that should underpin EU's future action if we want the European project to produce results for the people in the years to come. From the Romania's perspective, our common efforts at EU level for the future should focus on the following elements. Promoting an inclusive and sustainable economic growth that contributes to ensuring real convergence within the EU. Then on deepening of the single market. Then increasing the security of the European citizens. And of course, promoting an effective EU external action. Of course, here we are mentioning not only to have the attention on EU partners in the eastern and southern neighborhood, but also seeking to strengthen the EU partnership with traditional allies such as US, as well as to implement joint security and defense initiatives in partnership with NATO. I will end my speech, because I know that I have a limited amount of time, by saying that in order to ensure the future of our Union, it is important for the Member States and the EU institutions to work together in a context that requires us to demonstrate, us now more than ever, the unity and the capacity to reach a consensus on major files at the European level. Romania's position as an EU member state will continue to focus on building the unity and flexibility needed to achieve ambitious goals common to all member states.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think those of us who follow European Union affairs would agree that Romania did a wonderful job in the presidency, and the Sibiu Declaration is an extremely important framework for us to work within. Our next speaker is the former Foreign Affairs Minister of Serbia, Dimitri Rupel. Please, the floor is yours. I'm sorry. I only have 20 names here with me. You have the floor, sir. Sorry.
That was, of course, a diversion, right?
Just to make sure people are awake.
Well, thank you very much. Let me first say that I'm extremely glad and proud that the Bled Forum has developed in whatever it has developed until today. Because I and Mr. Janša, then Prime Minister of Slovenia, have invented Bled Forum 13 years ago. So it is, so to say, our invention, and I'm so glad that it's progressed so well. Now, to answer your question, Mr. Paul, of course, I think that I should answer two questions. One is what will happen in the EU, and the other one is what will happen with Slovenia in the EU. Now, I have read, of course, the guidelines prepared by the President of the Commission, Madame von der Leyen. And I think that she has prepared wonderful points. I would like to stress a few. One is Frontex, 10,000 guards added to this force that will try to defend the outer borders of the European Union. Now, a second good idea is something she calls a conference on the future of Europe. And this is more or less something that we used to call convention. Many years back in 2002 and 2003, when the idea was ripe, but then our French friends and our Dutch friends have done whatever they have done. Now, I'm mentioning the idea of convention or conference on the future of Europe because here in Slovenia, a friend of mine, rector of the new university, has produced a draft for a European constitution. And Slovenia has something, so to say, in its luggage, in its baggage, regarding the European Union. Now, I was quite happy when I heard Professor Leta, Prime Minister Leta, whom I have admired for many years, when he said that European Union needs a new treaty or something new which has not been addressed by the existing treaties. The existing treaties have not addressed the issue of migrations. And now, I think that the European Union has been fighting with one crucial problem, that's the problem of its organization. In 1994, we have Schäuble-Lammers, then we have the convention, then we have Mr. Juncker's white paper, then we have von der Leyen's guidelines. All these papers and all these addresses actually deal with the problem of the organization of the European Union. Now, the constitution that Slovenia is sort of proposing, not really, only the president of the republic has mentioned it, I guess, here at Bled. This constitutional treaty or this draft has some interesting, I hope, some interesting points. The organization should be simplified. The European Union should get, instead of the Commission and the three bodies, Council and Parliament and Commission, should get a president and two homes, Parliament composed of the Council and the Assembly of Citizens and so on and so on. Now, of course, he also divides the issues that have to be dealt with into two groups. The group of issues that are exclusive competence of the Union, and the issues that are mixed or shared competence of the Union and of the member states. Now, we are faced with a very, very tough debate on whether European Union should develop into something state-like organization, or should it develop into no, I should use a different word. Do we need ever closer union, or do we need an ever looser union? That's the main issue, the main problem, and I think that we need actually a much closer union, also for the reasons that Prime Minister Leta has mentioned, namely. We shall have to compete in the world of China's and America's and India's probably, and Africa. Africa will have, I guess, 2.5 billion inhabitants, population in the year 2050, if I'm not mistaken. So we are really confronted with a very serious situation. And let me also add one thing. I think that practically European Union is divided into three main wings or main schools. The Central European or Northern School led by Germany, the Western Atlantic and Mediterranean group led by France, and then we have the new countries, 11 countries in the East, former communist countries, former socialist countries. The interesting thing is that the former socialist countries are quite critical of Russia. And the Western countries, or even Mediterranean countries, are quite critical of America. And I think that actually This is a very serious issue. European Union seems to be divided between, or should be situated between two great powers. One is Russia, the other one is America. And this division of sympathies is quite a serious matter. For Slovenia, and that's my last point, it will be extremely important to make peace with the countries around itself. Very often, in Slovenia, our politicians say, well, we are surrounded by right-wing, populist, nationalist, backward countries, and we are the island of democracy surrounded by these countries. Now, this is absolutely false. Slovenia is a member of this eastern wing. We share so many things with former socialist or communist countries, and we should work with them. And what is our real task now at this point? We should defend the eastern borders of the European Union. Now, the Mediterranean countries will be saddled with the defense of southern borders of the European Union. I don't know what Germany and the northern countries will do, but I think that we need an emphasis on cooperation between these three blocks, and we need a tough new debate on the organization of the European Union.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think this also raises a very interesting point, which we very rarely touch on specifically, which is how member states should collaborate better with the EU institutions. Perhaps, by the way, in the debate we can go back to the question as to whether there really is any appetite for serious constitutional debate about a new European constitution and so on. Our next speaker is Guillaume Clossat. He is masquerading now as a civil society, or camouflaging himself as a civil society spokesman, which he does very effectively. He is the emeritus president of a wonderful organization called Europa Nova, and the president of a citizens organization called Civico. But don't let this confuse you. He is, in fact, I think, a very hard-nosed realpolitik French analyst. He has wonderful experience. You have wonderful experience in the political sphere. So it would be interesting for you to give us a combination of views about how you see the future of Europe from this double perspective of yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. And thank you very much for inviting me in this very inspirational forum. I think this forum has a key place and key role to play in the next year, because you are a bridge. You are a bridge between north, south, east, and west. And we need bridges. It's very important. And just to precise, I have political experiences. I was Sherpa to the reflection group on the future of Europe at the European Council, special advisor to Vice President Ansip for artificial intelligence, and I was also in charge of the last French presidency of the EU on public debate with with the French ambassador here. Maybe some quick reflection. First of all, there is a European resilience. If you think back the last 15 years, we have the French snow crisis. We have the US crisis on Iraq with big division. We have the financial crisis. We have a first crisis with Russia. We had the crisis around Greece. We had the crisis with regard to migration. We have the Brexit crisis, and we have some kind of crisis with Russia and the US. And the initial bet was Europe is going to implode. We are not going to be able to keep united. We are too much different, and fragmentation is going to explode and to increasingly divide us. And we keep united. That's very important. It means that there is something which unites us, which is much stronger than what divides us. That's very important, first thing. Second thing, nobody spoke about it, but I think the Juncker Commission had good result. They kept unity. We get out of the economic and financial crisis with a lot of new jobs. There was more legitimacy with regard to the Commission than for the previous one. Just remind that from Jacques Santer Commission, one main issue was the Commission is not legitimate. There is a democratic issue with regard to the European Commission. And we may consider that the Spitzen candidate is not a good system, but the additional democratic legitimacy that the Spitzen candidate gave to President Juncker was very important to improve the democratic legitimacy of the European Commission. And we need to keep that in mind. Third, I think we are at the end of a period, and we have a new period which is opening. And for this new period, I consider that the work done with regard to the strategic agenda of the European Council is good. It's a very good strategic agenda. But now we have 5 difficult challenges ahead. And in order to be successful, we need to be creative, we need to be bold, and we need to be able to reconcile national and European interest, short, medium, and long term. The 5 challenges are this one. First of all, democracy. There will be the Brexit. It may be a very hard Brexit. And we need to write a new chapter of the European history. That's why President von der Leyen, and you were right, Minister, said that we need to develop a conference on the future of Europe with citizens. And one key issue is how to prepare this reflection on the future of Europe with citizens and how to prepare Europe for 2040, 2050. I have worked on the last reflection group on the future of Europe 10 years ago. And all what we are discussing now, one was on the recommendation we made 10 years ago. But the discussion we have today are based upon reflection 10 years ago. We need to have discussion made for 2040, 2050. Otherwise, we are going to remain follower. And the question for us is not to adapt, is to lead. But you can only lead if you have a prospective vision. Second of all, I fully agree with Enrico Letta on the Sustainable Development Challenge. But the real issue is the following. The more we understand this challenge, the more we understand we are late, and the more we understand this is a systemic challenge. We are working on this challenge, and the Commission is organized like that, and our member state organization is like that, and the Parliament is organized like that. We are working in silo. And the silos are not connected. We need to connect the energy and climate silo, the industry silo, the finance silo, the social silo, in order to have a systemic strategy with regard to this challenge. And we need to develop a public consensus on where we want to go, because the job is very, very, very high. And without political consensus and citizen consensus, we are not being able to address the challenge. The third issue is we know, and this is a matter of experience, that there might be soon a new economic and financial crisis. We know that. And the question is how to prepare ourselves well. And we have several ways to do it. First of all, we need to increase our growth capacity. And for that, we need to develop a new vision of the single market. The vision of the single market we have is the vision of the 90s. We need to develop the vision of the 2040. First of all. Second of all, we need to adapt the Eurozone. And there are small things we need to do. For example, the banking insurance deposit is very important. We need to adapt the European stability mechanism in case of asymmetric shock for a country. We can do a certain number of things. And first of all, we need to think on how to use the euro in this perspective. This is the third challenge. The fourth challenge, I would say, is the social cohesion challenge that we need to link to migration. But one key issue is we have a lot of talent in Europe, and particularly in Eastern countries, but these talent are going to France, to Germany, to the UK, to the US. These talent very often are liberal people, they are not conservative or not populist people, and the money they create, the economic value they create, are not for their native country. We need to combine freedom of movement and a kind of, I would say, economic feedback for the native country. And this is a matter of solidarity, and we need to be very creative in this respect. And for me, the last challenge is an urgent one, which is linked to artificial intelligence and digital. Artificial intelligence, indeed, we need to define the standard and platform. The question is that we have to compete with transnational, multi-industrial digital platforms which are capturing the economic value and which are behaving as colonial companies. I mean, the French, the Dutch, the British colonial companies 500 years ago up to 100 years ago were behaving. They catch up the national economic value, they get very cheap labor, and all the economic value come back to China or the US. And they disrupt national industry and national economy. And there is an incremental effect, and the more time goes by, the more they are powerful. So we need to have not only regulation, but we need to have as some German stakeholder, I think about Ulrich Wilhelm suggests, we need to develop our own European transnational platform. If we are able to give answer and a clear roadmap with regard to these 5 challenges, we will be in a position to extend Europe and to make, I would say, successful enlargement. But as long as we have no answer for that, the conditions for enlargement are very difficult. And in addition to that, we need to associate citizens to solve out these challenges, because that is the way to write a new European narrative based upon our value, upon our history, but projecting us collectively in a shared vision of the future. And then we will be able to have a European public space and to be able to speak about European politics. That's my vision.
Thank you very much, Guillaume, and thank you for putting some specific meat on those bones and giving us some idea as to how we might face those 5 challenges. Our next speaker is Igor Mali, who is State Secretary at the Prime Minister's office here in Slovenia.
Thank you very much. I carefully listened to Mr. Klose, and at the beginning of his presentation, he mentioned the word crisis 6 times. What I would like to underline here is that Europe, especially European Union, is still the safest and the best place to live in the whole world. But if we don't act, in the next 14 years, 30 years, it might not be the case. So now it's a time for action and not for endless debates at different levels. So my first point here would be that the new Commission, or the new period of European institutions, their most important goal would be to strike the right balance between the external and internal challenges the Europe is facing. External ones were mentioned several times, like climate changes, like trade wars, even migration, mass migration, and so-called G2 that Mr. Letta and also yesterday Mr. Borrell mentioned. So bipolar world. And on the other side, the internal challenges. EU has many. It is quite clear. From social cohesion, endless debates about changing of Dublin, asylum, then the security issues, different one we have, and the implementation of the rule of law, to name only a few. What is also important here as concerns the internal challenges is also the word implementation. We have a lot of discussions at different levels, but there is still an issue of implementation, what we agree upon. From the, I don't know, the area of economy or environment, or even the rule of law. So the challenge for the new commission, which this panel is about, is also to make a good, proper link between different areas of the external and internal challenges. Yeah? Some were already mentioned, like to do a proper link and to focus on the link between climate and economy. We can discuss a lot about climate changes, but if we don't have the economy behind, a proper transformation of the economy, we'll be stuck. We'll still would have a problem. The next link is the link between migration and development, development aid. The third between climate and innovation, or cyber and innovation, or security and innovation. And I would add additional one also between internal market and so-called internal border checks. There are links here, and we have to work on it, on them. Mr. Letta mentioned the tools with which we can make a progress. The most important tool, as I see it, and this will be one of the first big challenges for the new Commission, is the next MFF. So the multi-annual financial framework, the EU budget. The Commission tabled the proposal last spring. If you ask me, it's a very good and balanced one. But the biggest challenge now will be, and the negotiations will most probably start in October, alongside with the Brexit issue, how will we divide the money? There are big tensions now from certain member states to lower the overall budget. And we are talking about 1% of the GDP of the EU. Yeah? So the main discussion will be whether we will have 1% or 1.1%, which sounds strange, even for some stupid. But when we are talking about the challenges we are facing at the global sphere and internally, from before mentioned climate changes to social cohesion, we have to have money behind. Otherwise, we will just debate. So, if you ask me, the first real test of the EU will be the budget. So the next MFF negotiations. I truly hope that we'll not discuss about cutting the spending in large amount, but when we will discuss the budget, we will also have in mind the priorities the EU have in the future years. Because I've done this MFF negotiations for 2 times. This is now 3rd time for me. Whenever the negotiations come into the final stage, every member state defends their own priorities. And there are only 3 kinds of member states. One that wants to have as less money in the EU coffers as possible. Second, the second group is the one who wants to defend agriculture and nothing else. And the third one, cohesion and nothing else. So if we will start with the debate on how to cut the budget from the very beginning, have in mind that at the end of the days, we will end up with less and less money for the spending we really need. And this is innovation, environment, climate change, development aid, migration, and stuff like that. Not to be very long at the beginning, I would just respond also to an initiative or the idea Mr. Ruppel also mentioned about and Mr. Leta about the new treaty. New treaty of the EU. For me, well, at the long term, I like the idea. But in a short term, if we enter into the debate about the new treaty, we'll discuss only this. We'll not discuss the future challenges we need to discuss, from climate to, I don't know, competitiveness, cyber, and so on. We'll only discuss the institutional issues. And I think that this is something we definitely need to avoid. To engage in a sort of an internal spiral of who will do what, and then not thinking about the big picture. I think we need to think about the big picture in the next couple of years from the perspective of the priorities, external and internal ones, and from the perspective also of the budget. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much for raising that. For a while, I thought you were speaking on behalf of the Commission, not on behalf of your country, which is excellent. It's very rare. It's very rare because who thinks about the European general interest is, I think, a valid question. You were talking really about Europe's inability to think strategically, to plan strategically, or to anticipate issues strategically, and you were making a very valid point. I think there is nothing more depressing and pathetic than the process of negotiating the multi-annual framework. Our citizens are astounded when they occasionally finally realize that we only spend 1% of European GDP. The haggling between the member states is one of the most appalling spectacles that senior officials can provide. And yes, indeed, who thinks of the European general interest? And I want to connect this with something that we haven't raised yet, which is, I think most academics would agree that although the Juncker Commission has done a good job, we have been living through a period of creeping intergovernmentalism. The Commission is weaker than it once was. Now, so I would encourage you to answer this very simple question at some point, if we have time today, which is, what is the next Commission actually going to be like? Because without a strong Commission, in this increasingly heterogeneous and some would say divided EU, we really do need some strong guidance. So let me just throw that out there. Our next speaker is Pierre Heilbronn, who is the Vice President for Policy and Partnerships at the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. Pierre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Charles, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to come back to BLED, which is always a wonderful experience. And before tweeting probably 3 messages like Enrico Letta, let me be civilized and thank you for obviously your hospitality. I will not speak on behalf of EBRD, even if and I spent 20 years in European affairs negotiating 4 packages of MFF, so I know quite well the frustration you can have in the room when the end negotiation happens. But talk from also with this European experience, but also with the eyes of a multilateral institution, EBRD, which was very much a Franco-German creation at the origin, after a big shock or a big window open by the fall of the Berlin Wall, trying to be ambitious and look at how an institution or collective efforts by the Europeans, but bringing also non-European countries on board, could transform more or less countries into more democratic countries and more market-driven economies. And I think this ambition is very much relevant in a way, even today, more or less 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall. We are a bank, so we are practical people, and I think if you ask me about what is needed from the next Commission, I would say obviously vision, and in France we are always very, very good in delivering visions and discussing visions. I spent a lot of time doing that in my life. But what is even more important is delivery, and that we are generally a little bit less good at in Europe. And this more or less goes into many directions. I think what was mentioned about climate change is fundamental. Many of us talk about that. EBRD, a little bit by chance, because of working in very energy inefficient countries in Eastern Europe, developed for quite a long time tools, instruments of financing, which, by the way, explain that 40% of our activities are on the climate change area, which is quite a record when you look at all developing banks in the world. But I think the main issue is how we can scale up what we're doing. And that's more or less requires a little bit of public money. And what you said about the European budget is very important. But it requires much more. It requires also being serious about leveraging private sector money. And that's something which is always in speeches. The Juncker plan is based on this idea. When you look in reality, in some countries, especially in Central and Eastern European countries, you see much less of results in that area. And I hope that InvestEU, the new instrument, will allow, obviously, to up our games, bringing really the private sector around the table and boosting investment. The second thing, and it's very fundamental, it's obviously competitiveness, convergence. I think the idea that no one should be left behind is still a very important principle at the basis of the European Union. And it requires a lot of practical things. I will not go into details, but about converging within capital markets of different countries. And that's quite fundamental in the next years. Third issue, and I think probably that's one of the most pressing one, because it connects also what's happening outside the EU and our public opinion inside the EU. You mentioned this connection, for example, around migration, is our development agenda and how more or less Europe wants to export stability and not import instability within its border. And exporting stability, exporting development, exporting also the capacity to create jobs in the south of the Mediterranean, in the east, in Africa, is really something where the margin or the potential of improving the efficiency of the European Union is very big. I think that the debate which is starting around the European development architecture, the Commission, EIB, EBRD, and how serious we are about that is very crucial also politically, because it's probably the first time where there is such a connection between external development, generally lived under only the narrative of threats, and public opinion in the EU. One subset of these elements of this theme is obviously about a region which is very dear to EBRD's heart, which is the Western Balkans. We are the first investor in all the 6 Western Balkan countries, and I was discussing obviously our prospects also with the Croatian Prime Minister a few hours ago about how we can reinvent a little bit our narrative, our ambition in this region of the world. The first summit between EU and the Western Balkan countries happened in Zagreb, by the way, under also an initiative of President Chirac and quite a lot of countries. I think next year will be quite crucial in trying to reinvent a little bit a model which we contribute to implement at a modest level, trying to create more interconnection between the country, be it physical, but also soft between societies, how you can make of this area one area which can attract also not only domestic investments, but international investment and create jobs and hopes for young people.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're quickly running out of time, so I must urge the final 2 speakers to be as brief as possible. Penultimate speaker is Andreas Peschke, who is the Director General for European Affairs at the German MFA. The floor is yours. 2.5 tweets.
Well, it's easy because everything has been said already. Maybe talking about the expectations, let me just add 1 or 2 points. A couple of issues on contents, because we have some expectations on what needs to be done, and a couple of points, actually only 1 point on structure and organization. On content, I think we would expect the next Commission to make a big priority on climate. Tackling climate change, this is really a #1 issue, at least in Germany, I think all over Europe and across the world. I think it's a matter of survival. It's also a matter where the European Union can play a leadership role. And I think we owe it to ourselves to be leaders on this one and to have really ambitious climate goals 2050. So that's first. I think the Commission, the President-elect said so much in her speech at the European Parliament, and we very much support her. Second point has been mentioned, not so prominently. That's why I would like to mention it prominently. The second point is social dimension. So we have a lot of strong legislation on the single market, but we have much less visibility for the social pillar of the European Union, and this is being increasingly negatively felt by our people. So I think we need to work on this, on substance and on visibility. We have a couple of issues in the pipeline, like the European Labour Agency that's going to be set up in Slovakia. In Germany, we are thinking about the concept of upward convergence. There are other ideas around. I think here we really need to work to not only kind of deliver results, but also gain the hearts and minds of our people. So social dimension is very important. The third issue, it has been mentioned a number of times, is migration. So if you ask people in the east of Germany, it's only migration. We had our regional elections in Saxony. Maybe some of you have followed it. Very worrisome results. It's only due to the migration crisis. So we need to tackle this. We need to take a new attempt at solving the migration crisis. We failed. It has been mentioned rightly during the last legislative cycle. We need to tackle it anew. And I think it has been mentioned, maybe there are some elements we can do as a coalition of the willing, because of the most affected member states or something like this. But this is also a question of solidarity. Talking about the MFF, I mean, everything the EU is about solidarity. Redistribution of money is solidarity. Migration is also solidarity. And we took like 1 million people in 2015. So our people tell us, maybe you ask for some solidarity also in Brussels. So it's a question of solidarity. So we can do something as a coalition of willing, but we need also an overall solidarity to tackle this issue. Maybe you can have some division of labor. Some countries engaging more in third country support, tackling the root challenges, others doing more on the protection of external borders, others doing more on the redistribution of migrants. I mean, there are things we can talk about, but we need an overall solidarity. And the fourth issue is external relations. I think one of the big issues about the European Union in the world is that we don't speak with one voice too often. Sometimes we do, but sometimes we don't. And I think we need to do more, to do so much more often. We have a couple of things in the pipeline, like the European Defence Fund, which will give us a completely new setup in the area of security and defense. So I think in the new financial setup, so we need to use it to reach a new quality in external relations. So these are 4 issues on content. One issue on structure. I think the last Commission did a good job in trying to focus its work. We had this cluster structure, vice presidents, clusters of commissioners dealing with separate issues. We would encourage the new Commission to follow on this path. One example is, again, external relations. I think we have very strong action on humanitarian assistance. We are the biggest donor. We have very strong action on development assistance. We are the biggest donor. We have very strong action on foreign affairs with the EAS that has been newly created. But sometimes you have the feeling that everybody is doing its own thing. Humanitarian assistance, development cooperation, external affairs. So I think we need to link up these issues to give us more clout in the world, to act with one voice and to really act efficiently. That's it.
Very much. It'll be very interesting, I think, to see whether Josep Borrell, if he is, as we all hope, appointed HRVP, manages to be VP as well as HR, right? That would be an interesting challenge. Okay, finally, last but by no means least, and someone in the earlier session was complaining, where are the young people? I don't want him to think that he is a token youngster, but we do have with us a representative of the Young Bled Strategic Forum, and his name is Kladji Kaziu, and he is from Albania, which is a country very dear to my heart. My first book was translated into Albanian, much to my shock and surprise, and immense pleasure.
Well, thank you, Charles, if I may call you first name. It's not always good to be the last, but at least I had time to go to the toilet because the panel was so long. So I'm not unhappy at all. I mean, it's an honor here to be today to present my ideas and thoughts on the topic and the future of Europe. But it's even a higher and a better honor to have here presenting the voice of the youth, more than 1,000 young people from all over Europe, which we were engaged in drafting a manifesto called Young Ideas for the Future of Europe, a project organized by IEP in Berlin, which I believe our dear guest here would know, CIF in France, and the Trans-European Policy Studies Association, which I believe all the panel has heard about. And I mean, it's even a greater honor and burden, I would say, in a good sense, to represent here the thoughts of all the Young Bled participants, which throughout all this weekend we had discussed and deliberated on the topics which were mentioned on this panel. And although I'm here today, I believe that each of them would be a wonderful panelist in this topic. So nonetheless, I'd like to touch on two main issues. First, on the European identity. So throughout all this manifesto drafting process and through all my experience in Europe and the EU, I was surprised in a good sense on the spirit that the young people had. We drafted this all around Europe, as I said, and it was surprising how everywhere we went, the youth had the same thoughts. Of course, there was no coordination between them, but that's a sign that the young don't care about borders. The young don't get why borders exist. The young don't get how there could be needed visas to travel within the EU, or there could be controlled checks, which happened a few years ago only because of the refugee crisis, which we really don't care about it. We really don't care about the political restraints, institutional restraints, and then further on, why we cannot have a more united, a more inclusive Europe, a more social cohesive Europe, as my predecessor mentioned. So, first of all, I'd like to touch on the education, although Mr. Leta at the beginning mentioned it throughout all the other topics that the Commission will have to deal in the future. For us youngsters, we believe that fostering a common European identity education is the basis. It's the only tool we can use that can be sustainable and efficient for the long run. We don't understand why Erasmus Plus should be so much, the increasing of the budget of Erasmus Plus in the next financial framework should be so much discussed, and still we are not sure if it will happen or not. We still don't understand why European Solidarity Corps should be solely a voluntary basis, why we cannot fulfill it under our formal education system, why not make it obligatory for every European to experience Europe and not stay within its town, village, or etc. Why cannot we provide funding for every European, not only 15 million Europeans, to travel around Europe and experience learning on Europe and learning on other countries? That's what we think is the basis of creating a European identity. Why cannot we have a European identity card or a European passport? Or no, it was discussed 10 years ago, 15 years ago on the constitutional process, or the Lisbon Treaty followed. But I said we don't care about political restraints or what politicians think when negotiating. We just want it better Europe, a united Europe, and we want it now. We don't want to wait 10 more years and then we come back with other young people saying the same stuff and nobody hearing at them. So I'd say this is the first point I'd like to touch on. And the second point I'd like to touch on is on foreign policy in a broad understanding of it. So, although the institutional framework of Europe, doesn't allow for a common EU policy in the proper sense of a state-run policy. It has restraints, it has difficult decision-making powers, it has thematic constraints, etc., etc. I believe every foreign minister or every country within the EU knows that without it, their voice would be much less heard in this turbulent global times and this dynamic shifting trends. So, I believe there is a need to better unite our foreign policy and security policy and have a unique voice in the world arena, but still the institutions currently and the treaties currently don't allow for it. I'm very happy to hear that they want to run a new convention on the future of Europe or run a new treaty. You call it Bled Treaty. I would like to call it very much Tirana Treaty, but still we are not yet part of the EU. That's not possible. Although I'm very pessimistic which one will happen later. In this time, I think none of them will probably happen. So. Going on that, touching on the migration thing and the value-based thing. So, the last point. The youth, when we discussed about the migration and all the foreign policy, how the EU conducts it, it's very interesting that the approach they brought in the table. We always discuss about it based on state-centered discussion or border-centered discussion. We define migrants as border passers, illegal refugees, etc., etc. Well, as the youth would like to have another approach, a human-based or human-centered approach. So they think of refugees, migrants only as labor force moving around the world. We don't count people going from I don't know, from Slovenia to Croatia or Croatia to Slovenia as migrants, but we count Albanians going to Croatia as migrants or as refugees at some point, whereas the reasons might most probably be the same. And in this sense, I mean, the youth would like to further go on with a value-based approach, with an ethical-based approach, with a merit-based approach. So please don't call them refugees, don't call them illegal at least first. You can don't call them illegal, please. It's not the right term for us. There is nothing illegal in moving and seeking for a better world and then for a better life. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is on how the EU based its foreign policy or global strategy or neighborhood policy, all of these good terms, which basically are more or less the same, despite the enlargement strategy, which is something a bit more different. So the youth would like, I mean, the EU at the Commission next will deal with some new problems, handled problems from the past Commission. We have situation with China, we have the situation with Syria, first of all, we have the situation with Libya, and further and so on. So I don't know actually what the EU stance will be in Syria situation, what will happen after the war, what will be the stance in Iran. I mean, we know the stance, although I would not fully agree to the approach of the Commission and the EES during these last times with the Iranian government, etc., but not to touch on political issues. Just keep in mind, please, don't see only the pragmatic interest, don't see only the trade interest, the economic relations interest, but keep in mind also the value and the ethics which Europe identity was built at the beginning. If you don't keep this in mind, then how can you promote a further inclusive Europe, a further united Europe based on the treaty and on the ideas of its founders, which were, besides pragmatic interest, based on the value for peace and prosperity. So keep values inside your old strategies and actions so that you can further look on for a better and more united Europe. And last, I could not skip the enlargement part since I come from Albania. Just a few words if it's still on time. So there's something very, very important, I think. I mean, we have been 2 or 3 years, I mean 2 years at least, that we got an unconditional report from the Commission to open negotiations, and more or less 4 years that we get conditional reports to open negotiations. So there is a big of a problem here. I know conditionality stands at the basis of it. I know carrots and sticks stands at the basis of it. I know that the EU Council decision-making stands at the basis of it. But I mean, there is something with the conditionality, and I see it work, and I see it happening on the ground in Albania, and I believe also in Northern Macedonia now. Conditionality works to get the country on the track. It works to do reforms on paper and with passing of time to implement them. Well, not always successful. I also know that Albania and all the Western Balkans have lost many wagons in approaching faster to the EU. I know that we might lose also this wagon as the situation seems right now with the October decision, but the issue is that the issue lies on I believe, on the narrative that the EU itself has within its own politics. So, sorry to say it, but I believe that the EU now is missing leadership, at least leadership claiming for a better Europe, which means an enlarged and unified Europe. And I believe a unified Europe will never be unified, truly unified, without the Western Balkans standing as a whole, just in the middle of Europe. So please don't try to make the political discourse on the pragmatic basis within your countries. When you talk about the enlargement, don't say only we have to enlarge because Russia is there, Turkey is there, China is there, but try to create a narrative, which I'd say would be the true narrative, saying the truth, the narrative which says why these countries actually fit within our values, why these countries actually fit within our history, why these countries actually fit to our vision for a united Europe, and why these countries actually merit at least to open negotiations. I know we're not ready to get inside maybe the EU. Maybe in these conditions in 2004, they would have called us ready. I don't know why. I mean, I'm not sure about that. But as conditions keep getting stricter, I'll just try to focus on the narrative. I mean, without the narrative, even though if you open negotiations with us 10 years later, if you don't change the narrative in our own countries and in your own countries, then we'll have the same discussion. We cannot give Albania the right to get in the EU because our people don't want it, our society don't want it, our institutions don't feel ready, or our populists will use it as a political tool. So
Thank you.
Please focus on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that very eloquent defense of enlargement, among other things, and of fundamental European values. You're absolutely right. So finally, we have another keynote speaker who is going to help us wrap up this session, and I'm very sorry that we've run over time. We're very fortunate to have the former Prime Minister of Slovenia, Alojz Peterle, with us. I know we're really very short of time, but it's an honor to have you with us, so please, the floor is yours. Is there a microphone in the room? If not, perhaps you can just athletically jump up on the stage. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the organizer for this extraordinary honor to be the so-called keynote listener. Something new for me, but I will try to do my best. There are two types of challenges, problems, or issues new Commission will have to deal with. First category is related to the question what we do. The second one, how we do. And I don't like to enlarge the compulsory catalog we have been using as far as our challenges are concerned, but I will just do some comments and I will add some points to that. First of all, I would like to thank the Croatian Minister for Foreign Affairs to inform us about the ambitious program of Croatian presidency. I like the accents of it, and I wish Croatia the best and good luck in exercising this very important duty. And our young colleague spoke about enlargement, and Minister, you spoke as well. I would be very brief in that, in this regard. I think it is important what you, Minister, said. Accession process is a transformational power. It is a possibility to influence developments. And I would say just don't block it, use it. Let use it, because with that we give the chance to the candidate countries and we assure our part of credibility in the process. And I know from Slovenian experience how frustrating it was to wait for a little bit, I would say 1 year in the waiting room. Then I was pleased by the word togetherness. There must be also European we, not just national I or egos. And European Union was possible because there was European we. And there are two main fundamental ideas of the European Union. Founding fathers were able to agree on these two ideas for respect of human dignity of everybody, of each person, and working together. And I think it is our duty in this very much changed European Union to reconsider what does it mean in new technological, political, and geopolitical context. What does it mean to respect human dignity of everybody, and what does it mean working together? We can work together only if we share some basic values, principles, and rules. And we are weak at the moment with all of them, with all three. No? And I would like to mention something that was not mentioned. The gap between Western Europe and Central Europe. What I saw in the European Parliament in particular, that we have not been aware of why we have these differences. It is not just about two leaders we usually name when we speak about differences. We don't understand why Central Europe is different. Politically, culturally, historically. And if we wish to have atmosphere which will contribute to more delivery, to more togetherness, we have to understand each other first. and then we will share. This is, I think, we need a more deepened dialogue with Central Europe in that regard. Then I would say that European army was not mentioned. Defense we addressed a little bit, but allow me just to express one question. What are Europeans today or tomorrow ready to fight for? We can establish European army organizationally, is not a problem, even financially, they say. I met those people who are in charge. But who is the enemy? And which are those values we are ready even to die for? Just a question. Then, my favorite, my main focus in my parliamentary work was health. We cannot do more Europe with more cancer, more diabetes, more osteoporosis. And this is not a sectorial issue. For me, this is a paradigmatic issue. And I would suggest to the new president, Madam Ursula von der Leyen, to name one commissioner as a vice president of the European Commission to coordinate health policies. I think we need such a kind of coordination. Then big data were mentioned, artificial intelligence. I think that we are quite late. There is awareness, but there is not action. China and the United States are far ahead of us. And it's about dignity. It's about respect of dignity. It's not just privacy. No? This is one of the issues. And now I would like to move to how to do things. How to do means unity, priorities, tools, general interests. Of course, we will not reach much without defining what is European general interests. We cannot have one strong union with two different understandings of rule of law, with two different, let's say only two different fiscal cultures, or very different budgetary cultures. And we cannot have one union with two migration policies. It is clear. But this is again related also to the question of identity, which cannot be discussed just from the ideological point of view. Some say, la droite identitaire. We see that the question of identity is a rising issue everywhere in the world. And it's better to try to understand what does it mean, why it is here, instead to moralize about that. No? So I'm coming to the last point. Some speakers, Minister Ruppel among them, mentioned this new European Convention. We were both members of it. I'm pleased that Gisela Stewart is with us, who was also a member of the Presidium of the European Convention. It lasted almost 3 years. Then, quite many years it lasted before it was ratified. So we have to survive this mandate, because in 5 years we will not be able to change the treaty, I suppose. No? And we had much more common will at that time that now, with all differences we are facing in the European Union. So I would say we can do much more on the basis of Lisbon Treaty if there was a political will. So the main point for me is political will, our common denominators. We can start a new European Convention. We have to discuss many points, but there are possibilities also as far as qualified majority is concerned to use the so-called passerelle and to agree what will we decide with qualified majority. So I wrote much more points but I will finish here. I would like to finish by saying that I'm one of those in this room who saw divided Europe. The division line was 3 kilometers from here. People were killed at the border, those who were migrants at that time. And I don't like to see such Europe again. This is our challenge, this is our duty. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prime Minister. On that upbeat note, I'm afraid we have to draw this session to a close. I'm terribly sorry that we didn't have time to take your questions. You still have 15 minutes worth of coffee break, which I hope you will make excellent use of. So please join me in thanking our speakers for their wonderful contributions. Thank you.